Before we dive into a tale of unexpected passion and a billionaire's thawing heart, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the emotional roller coaster we're about to embark on. The air in Elias Thorne's penthouse office was always meticulously controlled. Just like everything else in his life, the temperature was set to a precise 72 degrees Fahrenheit, the light filtered to a soft, even glow, and the only sound was the hushed hum of the city far below. Today, however, there was a palpable tension that even the most advanced climate control couldn't dispel. Across the polished mahogany desk from Elias sat Clara Maxwell, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her usually vibrant green eyes shadowed with a mix of apprehension and quiet defiance. She was a stark contrast to the sterile opulence around her, a wildflower trying to bloom in a meticulously cultivated hothouse. Her simple, yet elegant, dark blue dress was a testament to her understated style, a quiet rebellion against the ostentatious displays of wealth that permeated Elias's world. Her wavy, auburn hair, usually worn loose, was pulled back in a neat bun, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, a nervous habit that betrayed her inner turmoil. Elias, a man carved from granite and ambition, finally broke the silence. His voice was deep, devoid of any warmth, a tone accustomed to issuing commands and closing multi-million-dollar deals. His sharp, intelligent blue eyes, set beneath a perfectly sculpted brow, surveyed her with an almost clinical detachment. "Miss Maxwell, I believe we've discussed the terms exhaustively." He gestured to the thick stack of legal documents resting between them, a binding agreement that would inextricably link their lives. At least on paper. The documents were meticulously prepared, each clause ironclad, leaving no room for ambiguity or sentimentality. "You understand your role in this arrangement?" Clara nodded, her throat tight. The words caught in her throat, feeling foreign and almost absurd as she finally uttered them. "To be your wife. For 1 year. In name only." She paused, the weight of the pronouncement settling heavily upon her. "And to maintain a public image that supports your business interests." She, Clara Maxwell, a struggling art historian with a mountain of student debt and a family medical crisis, was about to become the contractual wife of Elias Thorne, the enigmatic and notoriously reclusive tech mogul whose net worth was measured in billions. It was a Faustian bargain, one she had reluctantly accepted out of desperation. Her younger sister, Lily, a bright, aspiring musician, needed an experimental surgery that was astronomically expensive, and Elias Thorne, through his vast philanthropic network, had indirectly offered the only viable path. He needed a wife to solidify a crucial business merger, a conservative family company that valued traditional values and stability. It was a purely transactional relationship, laid bare in the cold, precise language of the contract. There was no pretense of romance, no hint of affection, just a meticulously outlined exchange of services for financial salvation. Elias leaned back, his gaze unsettlingly analytical. He saw her not as a woman but as a component in a complex equation, a necessary variable to achieve his desired outcome. His perfectly chiseled features remained impassive, betraying no flicker of personal interest. "Precisely. There will be public appearances, social functions, the occasional shared meal, all designed to project the image of a stable, committed partnership. You will accompany me to all required events, engage politely with my associates, and maintain an impeccable public demeanor. But understand this, Miss Maxwell, our relationship is strictly professional. You are my wife on paper. Nothing more. There will be no intimacy, no emotional entanglement. You will maintain discretion at all times. Your personal life, what little you have, will be a ghost, carefully shielded from public view and any potential scandal. And in return, your sister's medical bills will be covered, fully and unequivocally, for the entire duration of her treatment and recovery, and a substantial sum deposited into your private account upon the successful completion of the year." Clara swallowed, the bitter taste of necessity coating her tongue. The thought of selling a year of her life, of sacrificing her autonomy for her sister's health, was both excruciating and empowering. She looked at the signature line on the last page, her name printed neatly below a series of legalese she barely comprehended, but whose implications were crystal clear. This wasn't a fairy tale, there was no Prince Charming, just a powerful man offering a lifeline in exchange for her freedom, her identity, for a year. She was selling a piece of herself, a part of her soul, to save her sister. The thought of Lily's fragile smile, her unwavering optimism even in the face of daunting illness, gave her the strength to pick up the pen. Her hand trembled slightly, but she signed, her signature clear and decisive despite the turmoil in her heart. Elias watched her, a flicker of something unreadable in his sharp blue eyes, then it was gone, replaced by his usual stoic expression. He picked up his own pen, a sleek, expensive instrument, and signed his name with a decisive flourish, sealing their fate. The contract was official, binding them in an agreement devoid of warmth or true connection. Good. The wedding will be a private affair at my estate in the Hamptons in 2 weeks. A small guest list, mostly business associates and a few close family friends. Your family can attend, but they must also understand the strict parameters of our agreement. Any deviation from the agreed-upon narrative will be met with consequences. Clara nodded, her mind already racing with the implications. Her small, close-knit family. Her eccentric Aunt May who would undoubtedly disapprove of such a cold arrangement. Her parents who would be torn between gratitude and concern for their daughter. I'll explain it to them, she promised, her voice laced with a quiet determination. See that you do, Elias stated, rising from his chair. He was tall, impeccably dressed, a figure of intimidating power that seemed to fill the vast office. He moved with a controlled grace, every movement purposeful. My executive assistant, Sarah Jenkins, will be in touch with all the details regarding the preparations, your wardrobe fittings, and your preliminary schedule. Welcome, Miss Maxwell, to your new life. Try not to make it any more complicated than it needs to be. He offered no hand, no smile. Just a cold, dismissive nod before turning to his panoramic window, his back to her, effectively ending the conversation. The city stretched out before him, a vast, impersonal landscape mirroring the emotional distance he meticulously maintained. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office's controlled temperature. She was now Elias Thorne's wife, a mere accessory in his grand scheme. A pawn in a game she barely understood. The signed paper in her hand felt heavy, a tangible representation of the gilded cage she had willingly stepped into. She wondered if she would ever truly be free again. If the year would pass quickly or if it would stretch into an unbearable eternity. The wedding was a blur of understated elegance. A carefully orchestrated performance for the benefit of the select few who attended. There were no lavish decorations, no boisterous celebrations. Just a tasteful display of wealth and quiet formality. Clara wore a simple, yet exquisite, ivory gown that Elias's assistant, Sarah, had chosen, a creation by a renowned designer that highlighted her natural grace, without being ostentatious. Elias, in a bespoke dark suit, looked every inch the formidable billionaire, his expression as unreadable as ever. His intense blue eyes scanned the room, not for guests, but for any deviation from the precise plan. There were no vows of love, no tender glances. Just a concise exchange of I do's under the gaze of a justice of the peace. The reception was equally formal. A series of polite conversations and well-wishes that felt hollow and insincere, echoing in the vast, echoing halls of the Hamptons estate. Clara plastered on a polite smile, her heart a knot of conflicting emotions. Her parents looked worried. Her Aunt May gave Elias a suspicious glare that he seemed entirely impervious to, and her sister, Lily, though looking frail, managed a weak but hopeful smile that reminded Clara why she was doing all of this. Lily's eyes, full of a fragile courage, were her beacon in the opulent but emotionally barren landscape. Their new home was Elias's sprawling penthouse, a masterpiece of modern architecture and minimalist design. It was vast, impersonal, and eerily silent. Despite the city humming vibrantly outside its soundproofed windows, Clara had a wing to herself. A luxurious suite that felt more like a five-star hotel room than a bedroom. There were no shared closets, no personal items intertwined, no indication of a life shared. The separation was absolute, a physical manifestation of their contractual distance. Their first night as husband and wife was a testament to their contract. Elias retreated to his own chambers immediately after the last guest departed from the Hamptons. His voice calm but firm, a cold politeness masking his true intent. Good night, Mrs. Thorne. I trust you'll find your accommodations satisfactory. Sarah will brief you on your schedule for the week tomorrow morning. We have several important public engagements coming up. Clara spent that night staring at the city lights. A dizzying tapestry of a life she wasn't truly a part of. She was a ghost in this magnificent house. A silent observer in Elias Thorne's meticulously constructed world, a prisoner in a gilded cage. The following weeks settled into a predictable rhythm. Clara's days were filled with carefully curated activities, charity galas for cousins she barely understood, exclusive art exhibitions she attended as a socialite rather than a scholar, and elaborate dinners with business partners, whose names and industries blurred into a monotonous hum. She learned to navigate the treacherous waters of high society, to smile politely even when her teeth ached from the effort, to make small talk with astonishing ease, to be the perfect accessory to Elias Thorne. He was always by her side at these events, a possessive hand often resting lightly on her lower back, a gesture that was purely for show, a performance of marital intimacy for the benefit of their discerning audience. Yet, even these calculated touches, the brush of his arm against hers, the faint, sophisticated scent of his expensive cologne, sent an unsettling ripple through her, a tremor of something she couldn't quite name. Despite their constant proximity in public, their private interactions were strictly limited. They spoke about logistics, about upcoming events, about the weather, about anything and everything that avoided true personal connection. Elias was a man of few words, and those words were always direct and to the point, devoid of any emotional nuance. He had an uncanny ability to make her feel both entirely seen and utterly invisible at the same time. He would observe her with an intensity that made her skin tingle, yet his eyes held no warmth, no personal interest. She was a task, an obligation, a necessary part of his ambitious plan, and she felt it keenly. One evening, after a particularly draining charity auction where she had to charm a notoriously difficult philanthropist, they returned to the penthouse. Elias loosened his tie, his gaze distant, as if still reviewing the evening's strategic victories. "You handled Mrs. Albright well tonight. Her husband's investment is crucial to the merger, and your conversational skills certainly helped solidify her commitment." It was as close to a compliment as she had ever received from him. A recognition of her utility, not her personhood. Clara, tired but relieved the evening was over, simply nodded. She seemed pleased with the antique vase she won. "I believe my knowledge of Ming Dynasty porcelain helped." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of rare approval. "Indeed. You have a knack for charming people, Miss Maxwell. It's useful. More useful than I had anticipated." The back-handed nature of the compliment stung, reminding her of her transactional role, her value measured by her strategic utility. She was a tool, an asset, not a person with her own feelings and desires. As the months passed, Clara found herself studying Elias, trying to decipher the man behind the formidable facade. He was relentless in his work, often staying in his home office until the early hours of the morning, fueled by an almost inhuman drive. He rarely showed emotion, his face a mask of calculated composure, his movements precise and economical. Yet, she noticed small things, subtle tells that hinted at a deeper, more complex individual beneath the surface, the way his jaw would tighten imperceptibly when a business deal went south, the rare, fleeting moment his eyes would linger on a piece of modern art, a subtle shift in his posture when he was genuinely intrigued by a conversation, a momentary crinkle at the corner of his eyes when he encountered something truly beautiful or intellectually stimulating. He was a puzzle, and against her better judgment, a part of her was becoming intrigued by solving it. One rainy afternoon, Clara found herself in the vast, empty living room, idly flipping through a book on Renaissance art, a moment of precious solitude. Elias emerged from his office, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, his usually immaculate hair a little disheveled. He looked unusually tired, his usually sharp features softened by a shadow of fatigue, the strain of his relentless work showing for the first time. He stopped, noticing her, a rare occurrence as their meticulously planned schedules usually kept them apart during the day. "You're still here?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual, a hint of surprise in his tone. "It's raining," she replied, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. Feeling caught doing nothing important, feeling exposed in her quiet moment of introspection. "I was just reading." He merely nodded, then walked towards the wet bar, his movements a little less fluid than usual. "Do you want a drink?" The offer was so out of character, so unalias, that it momentarily stunned her. He rarely offered anything beyond what was strictly necessary. A cup of tea, perhaps, she ventured, surprised by her own boldness. A small rebellion against their emotional distance. He paused, then poured himself a generous shot of amber liquid, swirling it thoughtfully in the crystal glass before turning to the elaborate tea station. He prepared a cup of Earl Grey with surprising care and precision, then placed it before her on the low coffee table. He sat in the opposite armchair, not his usual, more formal executive chair, but a plush, comfortable seat, a heavy silence settling between them, broken only by the gentle patter of rain against the panoramic windows, and the distant rumble of thunder. It was the longest they had ever been in close proximity without a public function as their excuse. Without a script to follow, without the watchful eyes of society. The air felt thick with unspoken things, with a nascent, fragile connection. Clara risked a glance at him. He was staring out at the rain-streaked city, his expression unreadable, lost in his own thoughts. For a fleeting moment, she felt a flicker of connection. A shared vulnerability in the quiet afternoon. A sense of two souls acknowledging each other in the vastness. But then, he stirred, his gaze hardening as if remembering himself. Remembering the boundaries he had so rigorously set. "Remember our agreement, Miss Maxwell," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. His earlier, momentary softening vanished. "Paper," he emphasized the word, a sharp, cold reminder of the rigid boundaries he had so meticulously erected between them. The fragile moment shattered, leaving Clara with a familiar ache of loneliness in the vast, empty penthouse. She was his wife, but only on paper, and he would never let her forget it. The cold, impenetrable wall was back up, higher and thicker than before. Clara's routine, though meticulously planned by Sarah, often left her with pockets of time she filled with her passion for art. She started visiting local galleries, attending lectures at the Met, and even began sketching again in a small, hidden notebook, a hobby she'd neglected since her sister's illness consumed her life. These moments were her escape. A brief reclamation of her true self amidst the gilded cage of her contractual marriage. Elias, if he noticed her pursuits, never commented. He was too consumed by his empire, by the looming merger that was the entire raison d'être for their charade, to pay attention to such trivialities. Then, the first crack appeared in their carefully constructed facade, not from within, but from a terrifying external force. Lily's condition, which had been stable, suddenly deteriorated. A severe complication rose after a routine checkup, necessitating an immediate and more aggressive course of treatment. An experimental procedure that pushed the boundaries of modern medicine. The news reached Clara in a frantic phone call from her mother, her voice choked with tears, barely coherent amidst her sobs. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and numb. She was in a high-end boutique, ostensibly choosing an outfit for an upcoming diplomatic dinner. When the call came, the exquisite designer dress she held slipped from her numb fingers, crumpling to the polished floor like a discarded dream. All the meticulously maintained composure she had cultivated over months crumbled instantly, revealing the raw fear beneath. Lily, her sweet, fragile Lily, whose vibrant spirit was too precious to be extinguished. She rushed back to the penthouse, her mind a whirlwind of fear and desperation. Her meticulously planned schedule forgotten, her professional veneer shattered. She knew Elias was in his office, immersed in his work. But she burst through the door without knocking, her breath coming in ragged gasps, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. Elias looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and irritation at the unexpected intrusion, an uncharacteristic breach of his carefully guarded sanctuary. He rose from his desk, his posture still imposing, but his usual calm was slightly ruffled. "Clara, is there a problem?" He rarely used her first name, and the slight formality of his tone highlighted the gravity of her distress, a recognition that this was not a minor inconvenience. "It's Lily," she choked out, tears finally spilling down her cheeks in an uncontrollable torrent. Her voice was barely audible, raw with grief. "Much worse. The doctors say she needs another procedure immediately. It's very risky. The prognosis is uncertain." Elias's features remained impassive, betraying no immediate emotion, but his eyes, for a fleeting moment, seemed to sharpen with a different kind of intensity. A focused concern that was not purely professional. He stood, walking around his desk, moving towards her with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't offer comfort, no reassuring touch, but his presence, towering and solid, was somehow grounding an anchor in her storm of panic. What exactly did the doctors say? I need specifics, Clara. His voice was calm, authoritative, cutting through her panic like a surgeon's scalpel, demanding clarity even in the face of chaos. Clara, struggling to compose herself, relayed the information, the medical jargon feeling like a foreign language of despair, each word a fresh stab of fear. They're saying it's urgent. And the cost. It's even more than before. This new procedure, it's experimental, not fully covered by insurance. The implication hung heavy in the air. The initial agreement had covered the first surgery and a year of follow-up care. This was unforeseen, an additional enormous expense that far exceeded their initial budget. Elias listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on her, absorbing every detail with unnerving precision. When she finished, the silence stretched, thick with her fear, her silent plea for help. I see, he finally said, his voice low, his mind already calculating solutions. Has your family contacted the hospital's finance department? And the specialists involved? Clara nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, feeling utterly helpless. They said they'd look into it, but it's a specialized procedure. And the insurance, it won't cover everything. It's a very niche treatment. Elias returned to his desk, picking up his phone. He barked a series of rapid commands into it, his voice precise and demanding, his demeanor shifting into full crisis management mode. Clara could only make out fragments. Sarah, contact Dr. Jensen's office immediately. Urgent medical files, prioritize immediate transfer. I want a full financial assessment and logistical plan within the hour. Coordinate with the hospital's head of surgery. He was already taking action, not with overt sympathy, but with the cold, efficient problem solving he applied to everything, channeling his formidable intellect and resources towards her sister's plight. He hung up, then looked at Clara, his gaze unwavering. I have my medical team looking into the details. They will liaise with Lily's doctors directly and ensure she receives the best possible care. Do not worry about the financial aspect, Clara. Our contract covers unforeseen medical complications, provided they are directly related to the initial condition. Consider it an extension of the original agreement. His words were pragmatic, yet they carried a strange, unexpected comfort. He wasn't saying he cared, he was simply stating a contractual obligation. But in that moment of profound fear, it was enough. The fact that he was moving heaven and earth for Lily, even under the guise of an agreement, was a lifeline. The next few days were agonizing. Clara was a wreck, her mind consumed with fear for Lily. She barely ate, barely slept, her anxiety a constant, gnawing presence. Elias, while maintaining his distance, seemed to adjust his schedule to be more present. Or perhaps she was just more aware of his presence. Now that her world had narrowed to this one terrifying focus, he would occasionally offer updates, delivered in his usual clipped tones, from his medical team. Each fragment of information a desperate comfort. Dr. Jensen confirms the procedure is necessary. It's scheduled for early next week. My team has arranged for the leading specialist in the field to oversee it, or the hospital is preparing the necessary resources. My team is overseeing the logistics and ensuring a seamless process. One evening, after she had spent hours staring blankly at the TV, unable to focus, Elias appeared in the living room. He held two glasses, one with his usual amber liquid, the other with what looked like a soothing herbal tea, steaming gently. He placed the tea before her on the coffee table. You haven't eaten properly in days, he stated, his gaze direct, a hint of steel in his voice. You won't be any help to your sister if you collapse. You need to maintain your strength. Clara looked at the tea, then at him, a sudden wave of gratitude washing over her. Thank you, she mumbled, her voice thick with emotion. The simple gesture, devoid of any sentimentality, felt profoundly kind in its own way. He wasn't trying to comfort her emotionally, but he was addressing her physical needs, a practical, grounded form of care that was entirely characteristic of him. He sat in his usual armchair, the silence between them less awkward than before, now filled with a shared, unspoken concern. Lily is strong, he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, almost a whisper. She'll get through this. She has a fighting spirit. It wasn't a platitude, it was a statement of fact. delivered with the quiet authority that made his words feel like an immutable truth. A prophecy she desperately wanted to believe. Clara looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time in a long while, seeing beyond the cold facade. The cold, calculating billionaire was still there. But beneath the layers of carefully constructed ice, there was a flicker of something human. He hadn't just paid for Lily's initial surgery. He was now throwing his formidable resources behind this new, terrifying crisis. Moving mountains for her sister. He was a man of his word, even when it extended beyond the literal interpretation of their contract. Even when it involved personal inconvenience and significant cost. In that moment of profound fear and unexpected support, Clara felt a shift. A tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart, a tiny seed of hope beginning to sprout. She was no longer just a contract, no longer just a paper wife. She was a person in distress, and Elias Thorne, in his own cold, pragmatic way, was acknowledging it, supporting her, protecting her sister. The cold billionaire, for a moment, had shown a glimpse of something other than ice. Something she was slowly, tentatively, beginning to recognize as care. The day of Lily's surgery was agonizing, stretching into an eternity of anxious waiting. Clara spent it at the hospital, pacing the sterile corridors, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Her parents were with her, their faces etched with worry, their hands clasped together in silent prayer. To her surprise, Elias arrived late in the afternoon. He didn't announce his presence, simply appeared, a stark, imposing figure in his expensive suit amidst the hushed chaos of the waiting room, cutting a striking contrast to the worn faces of the families around them. He exchanged a brief, quiet word with Clara's parents, a nod of acknowledgement, then settled into a chair slightly apart from them, his posture as impeccable as ever. But his eyes, she noticed, scanning the faces of the medical staff with an intensity that spoke volumes, observing everything, missing nothing. His presence, though silent, was a powerful anchor. He wasn't there to offer empty platitudes or emotional support, but to observe, to ensure everything was proceeding as it should, to project an aura of quiet authority that subtly influenced the staff. He was, in his own way, a silent guardian, lending his formidable power and reputation to their desperate hope. Hours crawled by, each minute an eternity. Finally, the surgeon emerged, his face tired but relieved, a faint smile playing on his lips. The surgery was a success, he announced, his voice clear and reassuring. A collective sigh of relief echoing through the waiting room. A wave of gratitude washing over them. It was a complex procedure, but Lily is stable. She's in recovery now, and we expect a full, if slow, recovery. Clara broke down, not in fear, but in overwhelming relief, collapsing into her mother's arms, her body shaking with the release of pent-up terror. Elias watched her, a subtle softening in his features that she almost missed, a brief, almost tender flicker in his eyes. He then spoke to the surgeon in hushed tones, asking precise, technical questions that indicated a deep understanding of the medical reports he had undoubtedly reviewed, confirming the details and prognosis. He wasn't just paying for the surgery, he was invested in understanding every facet of it, ensuring the best possible outcome. Later that evening, back in the penthouse, the silence felt different. It was no longer empty, but filled with a quiet sense of shared experience, a collective exhale, a lingering echoes of the day's emotional roller coaster. Clara found Elias in his study, a glass in hand, staring out at the cityscape, the lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. He didn't turn when she entered, perhaps anticipating her presence, perhaps lost in thought. "She's going to be okay," Clara said, her voice still a little hoarse from crying, filled with a fragile, soaring joy. "The doctor said the next 24 hours are critical, but everything looks good. She's strong, just like you said." Elias nodded, still not turning, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "My team is monitoring her progress directly with the hospital staff. They will inform me of any changes, no matter how minor." Clara walked further into the room, stopping a few feet behind him. The vastness of the study, usually so intimidating, felt less so now. "Thank you, Elias." The name felt natural on her tongue, no longer just a formal address, but a whisper of genuine gratitude and a burgeoning connection. "For everything. For going above and beyond the contract. You saved her life." He finally turned, his gaze meeting hers. There was a weariness in his eyes she hadn't noticed before, A subtle line of exhaustion etched around them, softening the sharp edges of his usual intensity. "It was a necessary expenditure," he said, his voice low, almost devoid of its usual sharpness, as if reciting a well-rehearsed line. "The success of the merger hinges on a stable public image. A wife whose sister is in critical condition would undoubtedly attract undue media scrutiny, potentially destabilizing the negotiations. It was prudent to ensure her well-being to prevent any unforeseen complications." His words, pragmatic as they were, didn't sting as they might have before. She knew it was partly true that his strategic mind saw every action through the lens of business. But she also knew it wasn't the entire truth. There was something else, something unspoken in his eyes. A depth of feeling he struggled to articulate. "You didn't have to stay at the hospital for hours," she pointed out softly, challenging his purely logical explanation. "That wasn't prudent. That was concern." A muscle twitched in his jaw. He looked away, then back at her, a flicker of internal conflict playing across his features. "I wanted to ensure proper oversight," he offered, his explanation weak, even for him, lacking his usual conviction. He seemed to be struggling with an internal battle, a war between his guarded mind and a nascent, unfamiliar emotion. Clara, emboldened by the raw emotion of the day, by the unexpected sincerity she sensed beneath his words, took a step closer. "You were worried, weren't you?" she whispered. It wasn't a question, but an observation. A gentle probe into his carefully constructed emotional fortress. His gaze snapped back to hers, a flicker of something she couldn't quite identify. Surprise? Annoyance? In their depths. "I am never worried," he stated, his voice regaining some of its usual steel. A desperate attempt to reassert control. "I assess risks. I mitigate them. That is all." "But you stayed," she pressed gently, her voice soft but insistent. "You watched. You waited. You didn't leave until you knew she was safe." He took a slow sip from his glass, the amber liquid swirling, then sighed. A sound that seemed to carry the weight of something long suppressed, a deep, weary exhalation. It was an unusual situation. He paused, then, to her utter astonishment, he continued, his voice softer, more hesitant than she had ever heard it, as if revealing a fragile secret. "I lost my own sister when I was young. A sudden illness. There was nothing anyone could do. No resources, no specialists. Just helplessness." He said it not as an explanation, but as a confession. A shard of vulnerability suddenly exposed in the meticulously guarded fortress of his being. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief and a rare, raw honesty. A window into a past that had shaped his entire existence. Clara felt a profound ache in her chest, a wave of empathy washing over her. All this time, she had seen him as a monolith, cold and unfeeling, an unbreachable wall of ambition. But he had known loss, deep and irreparable. His pragmatism, his control, his very detachment suddenly made a different kind of sense. It was a shield against a pain he couldn't bear to feel again. A fortress built on the ruins of a broken heart. She looked at him, not as the cold billionaire, not as her contractual husband, but as a man who had suffered, a man who carried a silent, lifelong wound. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain, a sudden urge to offer comfort. She took another step, closing the distance between them. Her hand, trembling slightly, reached out and gently rested on his arm, a soft, reassuring touch. Elias froze at her touch, his body rigid, as if a live wire had just connected. A shock of sensation rippling through him. He looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. His eyes wide with an emotion she couldn't name. It was surprise, yes, but something else, to a flicker of something vulnerable. Something almost lost, a yearning he hadn't known he possessed. The air crackled between them, thick with the unspoken. The vast, impersonal penthouse suddenly felt small, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with power or money but with the raw, human connection that had unexpectedly ignited. In that shared moment of quiet understanding, of unexpected vulnerability, the rigid boundaries of their contract seemed to waver just for a breath, fragile and ethereal. Her touch, light and unexpected, was like a spark on dry tinder, igniting a dormant fire within Elias. He had lived his life encased in ice, a meticulously constructed barrier against vulnerability and the messy chaos of human emotion, against the pain of loss. Clara's touch, soft and empathetic, threatened to shatter it, to dismantle decades of carefully built defenses. He felt a sudden, unfamiliar warmth spread through his arm. A warmth that resonated deeply with the unexpected revelation he had just made about his sister. A confession that had ripped open old wounds. It was a truth he had never intended to share. A chink in his armor he had rigorously maintained for decades, a secret he guarded fiercely. He looked at her, truly looked at her, with an intensity that went beyond analytical assessment. Her green eyes, usually so guarded, were now soft with understanding, with a genuine sympathy that was both unsettling and profoundly alluring. Her hand remained on his arm, a steady, comforting presence, radiating a warmth that seeped into his very being. He saw the faint smudges of fatigue under her eyes, the lingering worry that still shadowed her face despite the good news about Lily. She was beautiful, yes, in an understated, natural way that transcended superficial glamour. But more than that, she possessed a quiet strength, a resilience, and a profound empathy he had come to respect, even against his will. "Elias," she whispered again, her voice gentle, her eyes searching his, seeking a deeper truth. He didn't pull away. He couldn't. Her touch was a dam, holding back a torrent of emotions he had long suppressed. Emotions he hadn't realized were still alive within him. The grief for his sister, the fresh fear he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge for Lily. The strange, burgeoning awareness of the woman standing before him, her kindness, her quiet power. All of it swirled within him, threatening to overwhelm his carefully maintained control, to drown him in an unfamiliar sea of feeling. He felt a primal urge, an instinct he hadn't known he possessed, a raw, undeniable need to bridge the small gap between them, to pull her closer, to feel the warmth of her against him, to drown out the echoes of his painful past and the terrifying vulnerability of the present. It was an urge that defied logic, defied his contract, defied everything he believed in, everything he had meticulously built his life upon. It was an urge that simply was. His gaze dropped to her lips, slightly parted, full and inviting. A silent question hanging in the air. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken tension that hummed between them. A magnetic pull that defied all reason. He saw a flicker of apprehension in her eyes, a mirrored uncertainty, but also something else. An openness, a willingness to explore this uncharted territory. A silent invitation to step beyond the boundaries. His hand, almost of its own accord, reached out, not to push her away, not to reinforce the distance, but to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed softly over her skin, sending another jolt through him, a jolt of pure, unadulterated sensation, a raw, electric current. Her skin was soft, warm beneath his touch, a stark contrast to the coldness he usually inhabited. Her breath hitched slightly, a small gasp that fueled his burgeoning desire. "Clara," he murmured, her name a breath against his lips, tasting different, richer, more meaningful than when he had merely spoken it as a formality. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to retreat from this dangerous precipice. But she didn't. Her eyes fluttered closed, a silent, powerful invitation. A trust he hadn't earned but was desperate to keep. And then, their lips met. It was a tentative kiss at first, a soft exploration. A hesitant question asked and answered in the language of touch. A whispered inquiry into the depths of a hidden longing. It was nothing like the passionate, theatrical kisses he had witnessed in films or read about in books. It was hesitant, almost shy, a brush of lips that was both profound and utterly unexpected. A fragile beginning. But then, as her lips softened under his, as she leaned into him, a dam within Elias burst. The ice shattered. The cold, controlled exterior fractured completely. A wave of raw emotion, long dormant, long suppressed, surged through him, overwhelming his senses. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more demanding, fueled by years of emotional starvation. By the sudden, intoxicating taste of something real. His hand moved from her cheek to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, tilting her head to deepen the angle, to possess her completely in that moment. He tasted surprise and a nascent sweetness on her lips, a flavor he craved instantly. Her hand, which had been on his arm, now slid up to his shoulder, gripping him tightly, as if seeking an anchor in the sudden, powerful current that swept them both away. A silent acknowledgement of the storm they were now in. He kissed her with the intensity of a man starved, with the desperation of someone who had unexpectedly stumbled upon a source of warmth in a frozen world, with the ferocity of a wild thing finally tasting freedom. He tasted her. Inhaled her scent, a delicate mix of her natural skin and subtle floral notes, felt the soft press of her body against his, the undeniable connection of skin on skin. In that moment, the contract, the business merger, the carefully constructed walls of his life, all faded into insignificance, dissolved into nothingness. There was only Clara, only the surprising, overwhelming sensation of her kiss, which was slowly, irrevocably, melting the ice around his heart, transforming him from the inside out. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their chests heaving, their eyes wide with the aftershocks of a profound, life-altering moment. Her eyes were wide, a mixture of shock and wonder in their green depths, reflecting the seismic shift they had both just experienced. His own heart was pounding, a frantic rhythm he hadn't felt in years, a testament to the raw vitality she had awakened within him. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with the shattering of expectations, with the promise of something entirely new and terrifyingly real. He looked at her, his gaze intense, searching, as if trying to understand the seismic shift that had just occurred within him, trying to make sense of this new, powerful emotion. He had kissed his paper wife, a contractual obligation, a means to an end. But the kiss had been anything but paper. It had been real, raw, and utterly transformative. And as he looked at Clara, the woman who had just inadvertently ignited a fire in his carefully controlled existence, he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that nothing between them would ever be the same again. The ice had cracked, not just superficially, but deep down to its core. And the first hesitant rays of something entirely new were beginning to shine through. The cold billionaire had just experienced a warmth he hadn't known he was capable of. A warmth that both terrified and exhilarating him, irrevocably changing his definition of life and love. The silence that followed the kiss was deafening, amplified by the sudden, frantic beat of Clara's heart and the chaotic swirling of emotions within her. Her lips still tingled from the unexpected contact, her body humming with a mixture of shock, a nascent, unsettling excitement, and a surge of profound hope. She looked at Elias, whose expression was now unreadable once more. The flicker of vulnerability from moments before swiftly replaced by a familiar mask of controlled composure. Had she imagined it? Had the emotional turmoil of Lily's surgery, combined with his surprising confession, led her to misinterpret the intensity of their connection, to project her own desires onto him? The fear of rejection, so potent after such intimacy, began to creep in. Elias took a step back, breaking the intimate proximity that had enveloped them. The subtle movement a stark withdrawal. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare, almost disheveled gesture that betrayed a hint of his internal struggle, before turning away to face the panoramic window once more. His back was to her, presenting the familiar, impenetrable wall she had grown accustomed to. A physical manifestation of his emotional retreat. That was ill-advised, he finally stated, his voice low, controlled, every trace of emotion carefully excised. It was a business assessment, an objective analysis of a mistake, a calculated decision, not a personal reaction. The clinical detachment was a cruel balm to her tender heart. Clara felt a flush creep up her neck, a wave of shame and hurt washing over her. Her cheeks burned. She had just shared a moment of profound, unexpected intimacy, and he was dismissing it as a mere miscalculation, an unfortunate error in judgment. The sting of his words was sharper than any physical pain, cutting deep into her newfound hope. Ill-advised, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper laced with hurt. A fragile plea for him to reconsider. Elias, we allowed a moment of emotional distress to cloud our judgment, he interrupted, still not turning his back a wall of indifference. His voice was firm, unwavering, leaving no room for argument. It was a lapse. An unfortunate, temporary lapse. It will not happen again. We must remember our agreement, Clara. A cold dread seeped into Clara's bones, chilling her to the core. He was retreating, rebuilding his walls with a speed and precision that was breathtaking, sealing himself off completely. The crack in the ice, the brief glimpse of the man beneath, was already being sealed over, leaving no trace. So, it meant nothing to you, she asked, a desperate hope fluttering in her chest. Even as she knew, with a sinking certainty, the answer he would give. He finally turned, his eyes, though devoid of warmth, met hers with an unnerving directness. A gaze that felt like a cold, sharp blade. It meant nothing that would impact the terms of our agreement, Miss Maxwell. Our contract is clear. This deviation was a mistake, a momentary aberration. We are professionals. We will conduct ourselves as such, as we have always done." The words were a brutal dismissal, a final, definitive declaration that left no room for doubt or interpretation. He was pushing her back into her designated role, reminding her of the cold, transactional nature of their relationship, effectively nullifying the emotional earthquake they had just experienced. He was Elias Thorne, the cold billionaire, and she was simply his wife on paper. The brief, fiery kiss had been an anomaly, an error in his perfectly calibrated system, and he was correcting it with ruthless efficiency. Clara felt her own defenses rise, a protective shell forming around her bruised heart. The hurt hardened into a cold anger, a fierce self-preservation. "Right," she said, her voice sharp, infused with a bitterness she hadn't known she possessed. A desperate attempt to match his coldness. "Of course." A momentary lapse in judgment. "My apologies for my unprofessionalism, Mr. Thorne." She deliberately used the formal address, mirroring his own chilling detachment. "It won't happen again. You have my word." She turned on her heel and walked out of the study, her back ramrod straight. Each step a deliberate act of defiance, a desperate attempt to salvage her dignity. She didn't look back, but she could feel his gaze on her, a heavy, unsettling weight, even through the closed door. As she retreated to her own wing, the vast, empty penthouse felt more stifling than ever before. A gilded prison from which escape seemed impossible. The silence was no longer pregnant with possibility, but heavy with regret and the sharp, painful sting of rejection. The following days were even more tense than before. Elias and Clara maintained a strict distance, their interactions limited to public events where they resumed their flawless performance of a happily married couple. But beneath the surface, an icy chasm had opened between them, deeper and more profound than the one that had existed before the kiss. Their polite smiles felt like grimaces, their casual touches a forced charade, each gesture a reminder of the lie they were living. The kiss, which had briefly promised to melt the ice, had instead created a deeper, colder divide, pushing them further apart. Clara immersed herself in Lily's recovery, spending as much time as possible at the hospital, reveling in the genuine warmth of her family, in the unconditional love that healed her bruised soul. Lily, though still weak, was making steady progress, her cheerful spirit a balm to Clara's wounded heart, a reminder of the precious life she had fought to save. She avoided Elias whenever possible, finding solace in her art, in long, solitary walks through the city, trying desperately to erase the memory of that kiss, of the brief, terrifying glimpse of something she wasn't supposed to want. Something she now felt foolish for even imagining. One evening, Sarah, Elias's assistant, approached Clara with a stack of documents related to upcoming events. "Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Thorne has requested your presence at the annual Thorne Foundation Gala next month. It's our largest event of the year, a critical networking opportunity for the merger. He also requires your input on the guest list and menu, as you have a keen eye for aesthetics." Clara nodded, flipping through the papers, the heavy weight of her obligations settling on her shoulders. "Of course. Is he available to discuss it now?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, even though the thought of another forced interaction made her stomach clench with dread. Sarah hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty in her usually unflappable demeanor. "Mr. Thorne is occupied. He suggested you make the preliminary decisions and he would review them later. He also mentioned," Sarah lowered her voice slightly as if imparting a secret, "that he would prefer you choose a more traditional yet elegant gown, something that reflects the gravitas of the event and the family's image." Clara felt a surge of cold irritation. Even her clothing choices were dictated, a subtle, constant reminder of her role as an accessory, a carefully styled prop in his grand narrative. "Understood, Sarah. I'll prepare the list and consult with my own stylist regarding the gown." She walked away, the papers feeling like another heavy burden, another chain in her gilded prison. Elias was clearly avoiding her, relegating their interactions to formal directives through his assistant, maintaining the icy distance he had so ruthlessly re-established. He was punishing her, or perhaps himself, for that one, brief moment of weakness, for the unexpected humanity that had dared to surface. As the Thorne Foundation Gala approached, Clara felt a growing sense of dread. She knew she would have to spend the entire evening by Elias's side, playing the part of his devoted wife, all while the memory of their kiss and his subsequent brutal rejection gnawed at her. A constant, painful ache. The crack in the ice had not led to warmth, but to a deeper freeze, a colder, more painful distance than before. She wondered if she would ever truly escape the gilded cage, or if the paper contract had irrevocably bound her heart. Even as Elias insisted it was just a lapse, a momentary error in his perfectly controlled universe. The Thorn Foundation Gala was everything Clara expected: opulent, glittering, and utterly impersonal, a meticulously crafted spectacle of wealth and influence. Held in a grand ballroom overlooking the city skyline, it was a carefully curated display of power, prestige, and high society philanthropy. Clara, clad in a stunning midnight blue gown that she had defiantly chosen herself, a subtle victory she savored in her silent rebellion against his directives, moved through the crowd on Elias's arm, a perfect picture of elegance and grace. The deep hue of the fabric accentuated her green eyes, and the sophisticated cut enhanced her natural poise, making her undeniably radiant. Elias, in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, was a magnetic presence, drawing attention and deference from everyone around him. He was charming, articulate, and utterly in control, seamlessly navigating conversations about global finance, cutting-edge technology, and charitable endeavors with a practiced ease. He occasionally turned to Clara, offering a practiced smile or a brief, possessive touch on her waist, all for the benefit of their discerning audience. Each touch, each smile, each whispered comment was a carefully choreographed movement in their elaborate dance, a public display that belied the icy chasm that lay between them, a chasm that felt wider and deeper with each passing day. Clara, however, was keenly aware of the glances directed their way, not just admiring glances for the beautiful couple, but speculative ones, particularly from the women who clearly harbored their own ambitions regarding Elias Thorne. There was Sophia Vance, a glamorous socialite known for her aggressive pursuit of eligible billionaires, who shot Clara a look of pure venom every time Elias lingered a moment too long in their conversation, her perfectly manicured hand gripping her champagne flute a little too tightly. And then there was Julian Thorne, Elias's younger brother, a notoriously charming but unreliable playboy who made a point of engaging Clara in prolonged, overly familiar conversations, his eyes lingering on her a moment too long, much to Elias's subtle but palpable irritation. "You look breathtaking tonight, Clara," Julian purred, his hand lingering on her arm a little too long as he complimented her on her gown, his voice dripping with an insincere charm. Elias always did have an eye for exquisite things. He shot a knowing, almost challenging glance at his brother, who was deep in conversation with a senator, but whose jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, a telltale sign of his growing displeasure. Clara forced a polite smile, her internal alarm bells ringing. She instinctively pulled her arm back subtly. "Thank you, Julian. The Thorn Foundation has done truly remarkable work this year in education. I've been so impressed with the new scholarship program." She expertly steered the conversation back to the gala's purpose, a skill she had honed over months of playing the billionaire's wife, deflecting unwanted attention with practiced ease. Elias, however, seemed to notice the extended exchange. He excused himself from the senator with a curt nod and was instantly by Clara's side, his hand firmly on her lower back, a proprietary gesture that brooked no argument, a clear signal of ownership. "Julian, I believe Mrs. Albright was looking for you to discuss a donation for her animal sanctuary. She seemed quite eager to catch your attention," he stated, his voice even, but with an underlying steel that Julian instantly recognized, a clear warning. Julian, though clearly annoyed by the interruption, merely chuckled, a forced, theatrical sound. Always the watchful guardian, big brother. "Can't a man compliment his sister-in-law?" He winked at Clara, a gesture that made her cringe internally before melting into the crowd with a mock salute. The interaction and Elias's swift intervention left Clara feeling a strange mix of emotions. A flash of annoyance at Julian's overt flirtation, a hint of satisfaction at Elias's subtle, almost possessive jealousy, and a lingering frustration at the constant performance they were both trapped in. The endless charade, the fleeting thought that Elias might actually care if another man flirted with her. was quickly dismissed as absurd, a product of her own longing. Later, as they stood by a large window observing the revelers below, a notoriously nosy gossip columnist, Penelope Finch, approached them, her eyes glittering with journalistic ambition. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, a truly magnificent evening. The Thorne Foundation Gala is undoubtedly the highlight of the season. Mrs. Thorne, you simply glow. There have been whispers, of course, about your whirlwind romance, a true modern fairy tale. Can you tell us what's the secret to keeping the spark alive in such a busy life, especially for such a powerful couple?" Clara felt a sudden panic, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The carefully constructed lie, the intricate facade they maintained, was about to unravel under the probing questions of the seasoned reporter. She glanced at Elias, who remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the columnist, his poker face impeccable. He was waiting for her to answer, to play her part, to uphold the fragile illusion. Taking a deep breath, Clara summoned every ounce of her acting ability, every lesson she had learned in maintaining composure under pressure. She leaned slightly into Elias, her hand brushing his arm in a faint gesture of affection, a silent plea for his cooperation. "The secret," she began, her voice soft and imbued with a touch of playful intimacy, a warmth she manufactured with practiced ease, "is understanding and mutual respect. Elias and we appreciate the demands of each other's lives. We understand the importance of our respective work, and we make sure to carve out time for each other no matter how busy things get. It's about quality, not just quantity." She looked up at Elias, offering him a secret, conspiratorial smile, a perfect portrayal of a doting, devoted wife, her eyes sparkling with an artificial affection. Elias, to her surprise, didn't miss a beat. He returned her gaze, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile gracing his lips, a smile that never quite reached his eyes, but was enough to convince the shrewd columnist. He even tightened his grip on her waist, pulling her closer, a gesture of public intimacy that felt shockingly real, even to her, sending a jolt through her body despite her practiced detachment. "Indeed," he affirmed, his voice a low, warm rumble that sounded surprisingly convincing, his hand lingering on her waist for a beat longer than strictly necessary. "Clara has a remarkable way of bringing balance to my world. She's indispensable. A true partner." The columnist, beaming, jotted down notes furiously, her eyes alight with the romantic scoop she had just secured. "Oh, how wonderful! Mr. Thorne, indispensable is a powerful word indeed. A testament to true love in the modern age," she gushed, already formulating the headlines. As the columnist moved on to her next victim, the intimate bubble they had created popped. Elias immediately loosened his grip, stepping back slightly, his expression returning to its usual guarded neutrality, the mask firmly back in place. The warmth of his hand on her back vanished, leaving a cold void. Clara, however, felt a strange thrill, a mix of relief that they had successfully navigated the interrogation, and a lingering echo of his words. Indispensable, he had said it. For a moment, a tiny, fleeting moment, she had felt a connection, a shared understanding in their performance, and a surprising warmth from his calculated touch. It was a dangerous thought, to believe in the illusion they had created. "That was convincing," he stated, his voice flat, cutting through the lingering tension, dismissing the moment as merely a successful strategy. "I aim to please," Clara replied, her voice tinged with a sarcasm she couldn't entirely suppress, the anger from his earlier dismissal still simmering beneath the surface, a bitter taste on her tongue. He looked at her then, his blue eyes intense, searching, as if trying to understand the woman behind the facade, the woman who could play her part so perfectly, yet also harbor such quiet defiance. "You are good at this, Miss Maxwell." "Very good. Better than I anticipated." It was a compliment, delivered in his usual detached manner, but there was something in his gaze that hinted at more, a flicker of something that resembled admiration and perhaps a touch of something else she couldn't quite decipher, a hint of grudging respect, or even a nascent fascination. The memory of their kiss, the raw emotion of that moment, still hung between them, a silent, powerful presence despite their best efforts to ignore it. The gala was a success, their facade impenetrable, but for Clara, the evening had only deepened the unsettling complexity of her relationship with the cold billionaire. The ice was still there, but beneath its surface something was definitely stirring. a subtle tremor that hinted at a deeper, more profound shift. The aftermath of the gala, despite its public success, left Claire feeling emotionally drained. The constant performance was exhausting, each smile and touch a carefully calibrated effort. The lingering tension with Elias, a silent battle waged beneath the surface of their polite interactions, was a heavy weight on her soul. She craved a reprieve, a chance to breathe outside the gilded cage of the penthouse, away from the constant scrutiny and the oppressive silence of their shared, yet separate, lives. A few days later, Elias announced an unexpected trip. "We're going to the country estate for the weekend," he stated over a sterile breakfast. His voice devoid of any warmth, his gaze fixed on his tablet. "It's a necessary retreat before the final stages of the merger. There will be a few key investors joining us for informal discussions, and your presence will be required for the social engagements." Clara nodded, her heart sinking slightly. Another performance, another weekend spent pretending, away from the comfort of her sister's recovery. The country estate, nestled deep in a sprawling, meticulously manicured landscape, was even more impressive than the penthouse. It was an old-world mansion, brimming with antique furniture, priceless oil paintings, and an air of quiet grandeur that spoke of generations of wealth. It felt less sterile, more lived in, imbued with a subtle history, but still largely impersonal. A museum rather than a home. The first day was a repeat of their usual charade, polite conversations over expensive meals, strategic networking with powerful individuals, and the subtle, possessive gestures from Elias that marked her as his, a constant reminder of their unspoken agreement. However, the presence of nature, the vast expanse of green lawns, ancient trees, and fragrant rose gardens offered Clara a small measure of peace. She spent her free moments wandering the labyrinthine gardens, sketching the intricate patterns of leaves and flowers in her secret notebook, finding a quiet solace in her art, a brief escape from the demands of her role. One afternoon, during a lull in the business discussions, Clara found herself in the estate's impressive library, tracing the spines of old, leather-bound books, inhaling the scent of aged paper and leather. Elias entered, a rare sight outside his office or the formal entertaining spaces. He wasn't in a suit, but rather a more casual, though still impeccably tailored, cashmere sweater and slacks, a slightly softer image that caught her off guard, making him seem almost approachable. He stopped, observing her from the doorway for a moment before moving further into the room. "You seem to enjoy this," he noted, gesturing vaguely to the towering bookshelves, filled with volumes spanning centuries. "I do," she replied, her voice softer than usual, drawn into the quiet sanctity of the library. "There's a comfort in old stories, in lives lived before us, a sense of connection to history." He walked over to a specific section, his fingers running along the spines before he pulled out a thick, leather-bound volume, its cover worn smooth with age. "My mother used to read to me from this," he said, his voice unusually quiet, almost wistful, imbued with a rare nostalgia. It was a book of ancient myths and legends, richly illustrated. He opened it, revealing delicate, hand-drawn illustrations that depicted fantastical creatures and heroic tales. "She loved this story," he murmured, pointing to a depiction of a goddess surrounded by wildflowers, her face serene and radiant. "Said it reminded her of me, the way I always had my nose in a book, dreaming of other worlds." A faint, almost ghost-like smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of a boy, not a billionaire. A momentary regression to a simpler, more innocent time. Clara felt a pang in her chest, a sudden rush of empathy. This was another crack, a small window into the guarded memories he rarely revealed. Another layer peeling back from his impenetrable facade. "She sounds like a wonderful woman," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Elias nodded, his gaze distant, lost in the past. "She was. Full of life, full of joy. She died when I was 16. Cancer." The raw fact of it hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. Another layer added to the revelation about his sister. His life had been touched by so much loss, so early, so irrevocably. It explained so much about his guarded nature, his insatiable need for control, his carefully constructed emotional distance. It wasn't just ambition that drove him, it was a profound fear of loss, of helplessness. "I'm so sorry, Elias," Clara said, her voice filled with genuine empathy, her heart aching for the boy he had once been. She understood now, on a deeper level, the roots of his coldness, the impenetrable fortress he had built around himself. It wasn't just ambition. It was a desperate attempt to protect a heart that had been broken too many times. A shield against unimaginable pain. He looked at her, his eyes holding a depth of unspoken sorrow she hadn't seen before. A vulnerable humanity that was utterly disarming. "It's why I vowed never to allow myself to be vulnerable again," he confessed. His voice barely a whisper, a stark, painful admission. Emotion is a weakness. It leaves you exposed, open to pain, to disappointment, to ultimate loss. It takes everything from you. Clara slowly reached out, her hand hovering for a moment, a silent question. Before she gently placed it on his, a tentative connection. This time, he didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't retreat into his usual shell. His hand remained steady beneath hers. "Sometimes," she said softly, her voice imbued with a quiet wisdom, "vulnerability is where true strength lies. To love, even knowing the risk of loss, is a choice. A courageous one. To build walls protects you from pain, but it also keeps out all the joy, all the connection." Their gazes locked, and in that moment, the carefully constructed walls between them seemed to crumble. Not just physically but emotionally. The cold billionaire, for a fleeting instant, was just Elias, a man burdened by grief, aching for connection, even if he didn't know how to seek it, how to allow it. The air hummed with unspoken understanding, with a fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the ice was thawing, not just from the outside, but from deep within, melting slowly but surely. The country estate, far from the prying eyes of the city and the demands of their public roles, had offered a sanctuary, a sacred space for truths to be unveiled, for a different kind of connection to tentatively bloom, a delicate flower in a frozen landscape. The revelation of Elias's past, the dual losses of his mother and sister, hung in the air between them, a fragile thread of understanding that connected them in a way the contract never could. It was a bridge built of shared sorrow and newfound empathy. The country estate, with its quiet solace, its distance from the city's relentless demands and their performative existence, seemed to foster this new, tentative intimacy. Allowing their defenses to slowly erode, they began spending more time together, not in their official capacity as a power couple, but in small, stolen moments of genuine connection. Morning walks through the dewy gardens, where they discussed everything from art history to quantum physics, evenings spent in the library. A rare, relaxed meal where conversation flowed more freely than before, punctuated by easy silences that were no longer awkward but comforting. Elias, still reserved by nature, gradually softened. The rigid lines of his face relaxed, a flicker of something akin to warmth occasionally appearing in his sharp blue eyes. He spoke of his childhood, of his dreams before the weight of his father's legacy and the tragic losses had hardened him into the man he was. He listened intently as Clara spoke of her art, her passion for history, her fears and hopes for Lily, her unwavering belief in the beauty of the world. They were no longer just a contractual husband and wife, they were two individuals, slowly, cautiously, peeling back the layers of their defenses, revealing their true selves to each other. One evening, after the last of the investors had departed, leaving them gloriously alone in the quiet grandeur of the estate, they found themselves on a sprawling veranda bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of twilight. The air was cool, scented with pine and night-blooming jasmine, a symphony of natural fragrances. The stars began to prickle the inky sky, far from the light pollution of the city. "The merger is almost complete," Elias stated, breaking the comfortable silence. His voice a low rumble. His tone held a note of triumph, the culmination of years of tireless work, but also a strange melancholy, as if a chapter was closing, and he wasn't entirely sure what would come next. "Your part in this, it has been invaluable, Clara. Far more than I initially anticipated." He used her first name effortlessly now, a subtle shift that made her heart flutter, a silent acknowledgement of their deepening connection. Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, a beautiful blend of deep purples and oranges. The thought of the contract ending, of their lives diverging, suddenly felt like a heavy weight, a future she no longer desired. "I'm glad I could help. Truly." He turned to her, his profile sharp against the fading light, then stepped closer, his body language open, inviting. "Lily is recovering well, isn't she? My medical team reports excellent progress." She'll be back to full strength soon. She is, Clara confirmed, a genuine smile gracing her lips, relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. She's even starting to talk about art school again. We owe you so much, Elias. More than I can ever repay. He was silent for a moment, then he sighed. A sound that seemed to carry the weight of something he had long struggled with, a deep, internal conflict. You owe me nothing, Clara. In fact, it is quite the opposite. He turned fully to face her, his blue eyes intense, searching, holding a vulnerability that was utterly disarming. The truth is, I was the one who was lost. Adrift in a sea of ambition and solitude, convinced that emotions were a weakness. And you found something in me I thought was long dead. Something I had deliberately buried. Clara's breath hitched, caught in her throat. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at him, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. The complete vulnerability that had once again surfaced, stripped bare of all pretense. He took a step closer, his hand reaching out, not to touch her but to hover inches from her arm. His fingers trembling almost imperceptibly as if seeking permission, as if unsure of his own right to reach for her. That kiss, he began, his voice rough, thick with unspoken feelings. The one I dismissed as a lapse in judgment, it wasn't. Not for me. It was a jolt, a shock, a sudden, terrifying realization that I wasn't as cold as I pretended to be. That my heart was not entirely made of ice. He lowered his gaze, his jaw tight, a muscle clenching visibly. I've been a fool, Clara. A profound fool. I built walls so high, so impenetrable. I forgot what it was like to feel anything other than ambition and control. You broke through them. You saw past the billionaire, past the contract, to the man I used to be, the man I'm slowly, painfully, starting to remember, the man who yearns for something more. He finally met her gaze, his eyes shining with an emotion she had rarely seen from him, raw, unadulterated yearning, a desperate hope. I lied when I said it meant nothing. It meant everything. It terrified me. And that's why I pushed you away, why I retreated. Because feeling you, it scares me more than any business failure. Because I don't want to lose you, Clara. Not after finally finding you. Not after you showed me what it truly means to live. Clara felt tears welling in her eyes, tears of understanding, of immense relief. Of a blossoming hope she hadn't dared to nurture, a fragile, beautiful flower in the barren landscape of her contractual marriage. He was confessing, truly confessing, not just a fact, but a deep, buried emotion. A complete unraveling of his carefully constructed persona. The cold billionaire who had declared her his wife on paper was admitting to feelings that went far beyond any legal document, any transactional agreement. He was offering her his heart. Elias, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, her own heart overflowing. I thought I was imagining things. I thought it was just me, seeing things that weren't there. I thought you genuinely didn't care. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and burgeoning love. That kiss, it wasn't just a jolt for you. It was everything for me too. It changed everything I thought I knew about you, about us, about myself. He closed the remaining distance, his other hand coming up to cup her other cheek. His gaze was tender, brimming with a warmth that transformed his features. A stark contrast to the cold, analytical eyes she had first met. Clara, he murmured, his voice husky with emotion, raw and deep. I know I'm not easy. I've spent my life guarded, closed off. But with you, I feel like I can finally breathe. Like I can finally be me. The man I always wanted to be but was too afraid to show. Clara leaned into his touch, her hands reaching up to grasp his wrists, anchoring herself to his sudden, profound sincerity. You are more than just the cold billionaire, Elias. You are kind and fiercely protective, and underneath all that ice, there's a heart that feels deeply, a soul that yearns for connection. I've seen it. I've felt it. And I've fallen in love with it. With you, the words, once unspoken and terrifying, now poured out of her, freeing and exhilarating. A declaration of her own heart. A genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners, transforming his entire face. Spread across Elias's face. It was a smile of pure relief, of profound happiness. A sight so rare and beautiful that it took Clara's breath away, confirming the depth of his own emotions. You have, he whispered, his voice full of wonder as if he couldn't quite believe his luck. She nodded, a watery laugh escaping her lips, her eyes shining with tears and joy. Yes, Elias, I have. Truly. He didn't hesitate this time. He lowered his head and kissed her deeply and completely, under the watchful gaze of the rising stars. It wasn't a tentative exploration or a desperate release. It was a kiss of profound connection, of shared understanding, a promise of a future unfolding. It was a kiss that melted away all the coldness, all the paper, all the contractual obligations. It was a kiss that sealed their true bond. A testament to the unexpected power of love to break through the most formidable of walls, to heal the deepest of wounds. The ice was gone, replaced by a warmth that promised to last forever. Clara's heart soared. A feeling of lightness and joy she hadn't thought possible after months of living under the shadow of a contractual obligation. Elias's confession, raw and honest, had stripped away the last vestiges of doubt and the carefully constructed emotional barriers she had built around herself. He wasn't just admitting a lapse, he was admitting a profound shift. A complete transformation of his carefully ordered world. An admission of love that resonated deep within her soul. Elias, she breathed, her own voice trembling with emotion. I thought I was imagining things. I thought it was just me seeing a kindness that wasn't truly there. A connection that only existed in my own mind. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and burgeoning love. That kiss, it wasn't just a jolt for you. It was everything for me too. It changed everything I thought I knew about you, about us, about the very nature of love. He closed the remaining distance, his other hand coming up to cup her other cheek, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. His gaze was tender, brimming with an unguarded affection, a stark contrast to the cold, analytical eyes she had first met. Clara, he murmured, his voice husky with emotion, deep and resonant. I know I'm not easy. I've spent my life guarded, closed off, convinced that safety lay in solitude. But with you, I feel like I can finally breathe. Like I can finally be me. The man I was always meant to be before life taught me to hide. Clara leaned into his touch, her hands reaching up to grasp his wrists, anchoring herself to his sudden, profound sincerity, to the undeniable truth of their connection. You are more than just the cold billionaire, Elias. You are kind and fiercely protective, and underneath all that ice, there's a heart that feels deeply, a soul that yearns for connection, for warmth. I've seen it. I've felt it. And I've fallen in love with it. With you, the words, once unspoken and terrifying, now poured out of her, freeing and exhilarating. A powerful declaration of her own heart. A genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners, transforming his entire face with unadulterated joy, spread across Elias's face. It was a smile of pure relief, of profound happiness. A sight so rare and beautiful that it took Clara's breath away, confirming the depth of his own emotions. You have, he whispered, his voice full of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his luck. His vulnerability laid bare. She nodded, a watery laugh escaping her lips, her eyes shining with tears and joy. Yes, Elias, I have. Truly. With all my heart. He didn't hesitate this time. He lowered his head and kissed her, deeply and completely, under the watchful gaze of the rising stars, a silent testament to their newfound love. It wasn't a tentative exploration or a desperate release. It was a kiss of profound connection, of shared understanding, a sacred promise of a future unfolding. It was a kiss that melted away all the coldness, all the paper, all the contractual obligations. It was a kiss that sealed their true bond. A testament to the unexpected power of love to break through the most formidable of walls, to heal the deepest of wounds, and to reshape an entire existence. The ice was gone, replaced by a warmth that promised to last forever. The contract, initially a symbol of their transactional arrangement, faded into insignificance. A mere footnote in the epic love story they were just beginning to write. The year quickly concluded, but their relationship was far from over. Elias, true to his word and driven by a genuine concern that now went beyond any legal clause, had already extended Lily's medical coverage indefinitely, ensuring her full recovery and access to the best care possible. He had also established a significant trust in her name, a gesture that went far beyond the original agreement, a testament to his profound gratitude and his growing, unwavering love for Clara and her family. Clara, no longer just Elias Thorne's wife on paper, became his partner in every sense of the word. She flourished, revitalized by love and genuine appreciation. She continued her passion for art history. Elias discreetly funding a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving forgotten artistic legacies, a project she spearheaded with fierce dedication and a newfound confidence. She brought warmth and vibrancy into his meticulously controlled world, encouraging him to embrace life beyond the boardroom, to explore the world with her, to rediscover joy in simple things: a quiet evening by the fire, a spontaneous trip to a charming coastal town, a shared laugh over a silly anecdote. Their penthouse, once a sterile monument to ambition, gradually transformed into a home, filled with laughter, art, and the comforting chaos of shared lives. Their first public appearance after the contract's official end was at another Thorn Foundation gala a year after their initial charade. This time, there was no pretense, no performance required. Clara stood by Elias's side, her hand intertwined with his, a genuine, radiant smile gracing her lips, mirrored in his own eyes, which now held a soft, enduring light. The transformation in Elias was palpable. He still commanded respect, still possessed his formidable intelligence and business acumen. But now, there was a warmth in his eyes, a gentle ease in his demeanor, and an undeniable softness in his gaze towards Clara that had been utterly absent before. He looked at Clara not as an accessory but as his equal, his partner, his unwavering love, the woman who had brought him back to life. Julian Thorne approached them, a mischievous glint in his eye, but this time, his flirtation was tempered by a newfound respect. Well, big brother. Still looking as besotted as ever, I see. What happened to the just a wife on paper act? I thought you were strictly business, he teased, a genuine smile replacing his usual smirk. Elias merely smiled, a genuine, easy smile that surprised even Julian. A smile full of warmth and contentment. He pulled Clara closer, pressing a soft, tender kiss to her temple. A public display of affection that was entirely real. Some papers, he said, his gaze fixed on Clara, filled with an unspoken depth of emotion. A powerful, unspoken promise, are just the beginning of a much better story. A story that far transcends any legal document. Clara laughed, a clear, joyful sound that echoed with happiness. Indeed, she echoed, squeezing his hand, her heart full. The best stories are the ones you never expect. The ones that change you completely. Their journey was far from a conventional fairy tale. It was a story born of desperation, forged in a contractual agreement, and transformed by unexpected vulnerability and the undeniable power of a single, earth-shattering kiss. The cold billionaire, who had once declared his wife to be merely a name on paper, had found his heart irrevocably intertwined with hers, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unlikely of places, and that even the coldest of hearts can melt, given the right kind of warmth, the right kind of love, the right kind of Clara. They proved that true connection could break through any barrier, transforming paper into a promise, and a contract into a forever. And that, dear viewers, is a tale of how love can bloom in the most unexpected of places, even shattering the toughest of exteriors. If you enjoyed this journey of the cold billionaire and his paper wife, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories.